So this morning, as we prepare for communion, this is also supposed to impact our life. I'm going to read to you about an account that happened in 2 Kings chapter 6. If you have your device and want to follow along, you can. We have Bibles under the seats. Maybe you brought your Bible with you. It's 2 Kings chapter 6. If you're having a hard time finding that, it's right after 1 Kings. Right now, my kids, if I said something like that when they were living with us, they just go, "Oh, Dad." But, yeah. So, I want to read this to you. You might be familiar with this. You might have read it. You might have wondered, why is that in there? Or, wow, that's just really cool. I don't know what all it means, but that's really cool. And some of you might be, I know that. Teach me something new. Well, I don't know. Come back next week. So, 2 Kings chapter 6, it says this. Now the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, "See, the place where we dwell under your charge it's getting too small for us. Let us go to the Jordan and each of us get there a log and let us make a place for us to dwell." And he answered, "Go." Then one of them said, "Be pleased to go with your servants." And he answered, "I will go along." So he went with them, and when they came to the Jordan, they cut down trees. But as one of the other prophets was felling a log, his axe head fell into the water, and he cried out. Say this, cried out. You ever cry out? Yeah, you have, especially if you're a parent. And so he cries out. There's urgency. There's a bit of panic. It's I lose all my couth right now, and he cries out, "Alas, my master, it was borrowed." Then the man of God said, "Where did it fall?" And when the other prophet showed him where it fell, Elisha cut off a stick and he threw it there into the water. And then he made the iron axe head float. And he said, "Now pick it up." And so he reached out and he took it. Pretty cool story. I remember many times in years previous that I'd read this and I go, I don't know, maybe it just shows that, God's really sovereign. And he can defy nature, the laws of nature, and he can do miraculous things. And I just need to remember that. Or some say, well, it just goes to show that he cares about even the little things in our life. What I want us to grasp from the truth of this passage is that what happens here is not that he cares about some little detail in our life. And God does, but this was no little deal. We're going to find this out. This wasn't just about losing a tool in the water and no big deal, let's just go replace it. Why did this guy cry out? Why did he panic? Why? We're going to look at this. I want to give you a little backdrop first here. Jehoshaphat is no longer king. And Jehoshaphat, for the most part, you'll find out that he pleased the Lord as he was a king. Most of the things that he did it right in the eyes of the Lord. And after Jehoshaphat, is no longer, there was a few other kings and leaders that came along while Elisha was the prophet. And I want you to know that this next king did not do good in the eyes of the Lord, did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And so what became of God's people, now remember, this is the king of Israel. What became popular was not Yahwehism. Don't serve God alone. And so brought back the idols and Baal worship and all kinds of other gods. And so God's people at this time were being swayed back once again into committing idolatry. They were not worshiping the Lord, and it wasn't acceptable, and it wasn't popular. Does it sound like any place now on earth you know of? many places, maybe even within our own borders. And so what happens is the prophets start to go through more persecution. And the economy of Israel is affected also. It's not a prosperous time. And so this is kind of the spiritual and economic background view that we need to understand of what's happening at this time. And so what happens is the prophets, they start to kind of come together more and clump together more because they're being ridiculed, rejected, persecuted, even some unto death. And so the place that they started, one of the places they started to gather here as God's prophets, is the place just got too small. And so it's a real practical thing. It says, hey, we need to expand, or we need to have another location. We need to do something. And now this is a more remote place. This wasn't in town. Okay? They want to be out kind of away. It was almost a little bit of a commune or a monastic type of setting where they withdrew because of all the things that were going on, and to keep themselves and to pray and to hear from God in this difficult and wicked time of idolatry with God's people. And so this is the setting of which happens and why they're going to build. So, you can think, it's a cool story. The axe head floats. Wow, God's awesome, and all of that's true. But we need to grasp for a moment. We need to take hold of some understanding about what this meant and why did this guy panic. In the context of Scripture, an axe head or an axe, we see it mentioned and directives of how it's used. One way that the axe is used and it has value in our life, Jesus talks about it in Matthew chapter 3, I believe it's verse 10, and that any tree that grows and it does not produce good fruit, take an axe to the root of it, and then take it, and it's only good for the burning pile. Now, that is physically true, a principle they lived by, but Jesus, of course, is saying, hey, if there's things in your life and you're bearing bad fruit, you need to take an axe to the root of those things down in here, in our inner person, in our nature, in our soul, the things in our mind, attitudes we develop, whatever it is. And we need to put an axe to it. And we need to take it and put it in the burning pile. We need to chop that and get rid of it. Now, we're getting prepared to celebrate communion here, so I want you to know this is very much a part of also preparing us for communion, but our daily life. I mean, we need to look at the stuff inside us. I mean, maybe an attitude that has crept in the way of criticism or being judgmental or thinking we're more spiritual, we got it figured out. And what happens is we develop an attitude that is less than desirable or which is not proper for a Christian towards somebody else. God sees that stuff. That's the stuff that can bear bad fruit. And he says, you need to take an axe to that. See, we can't just let that live. We can't let it linger. And you think, okay, it's under control, it's not a big deal, and I kind of manage it, and I'm aware of it, but you let it linger, and you know what? I don't know the gestation period of some of these things within us. They don't crop up with bad fruit right away. We just let it linger and live, and we just kind of nurture it in a wrongful way, and we get used to it, and then the fruit shows up. And it's not fruit that the Lord's pleased with. And so, we need to pay attention to the value of an axe in our own life, laying an axe to the root of things. We're going to do it this morning. We're going to examine ourselves before we eat the bread and drink the cup. Another reason that an axe is used, and we find it here in this place, is an axe is used to chop, not to just kill something, but to build something. They laid an axe to these trees so that they could build something. And there's times that you and I need to lay an axe to some things because there's a purpose for it, to build something and build off this foundation of God's salvation for us. Well, here they're going to build. And so he's using an axe. And when it falls into the water, he calls out to Elisha in a panic, and then he says this phrase, and it was borrowed. Now, I don't know if you've ever wrecked anything, lost anything that you borrowed from somebody. I don't know. We probably have, I remember a story. It was, I lived in another place, and I went out with 3 other guys, and we were going fishing. And we were going up to kind of the United States part of the boundary waters, and we were going to go fishing and go for walleye. And one of the guys, he really didn't like fishing. He didn't really do much fishing, but he went along just kind of be with us. And I brought extra rods at that time, and even previous to that. I just used to do a lot of fishing. I had more rods and reels than a man should own. There, I confess before communion. And so I brought with, and I want this guy to have a good time, and I want to give him a great rod and reel that I have that is just a great walleye rod, and if he gets a fish on, I want him to have every best chance to land this fish. And so I told him, I said, this is how it works. He goes, yeah, I know how to work, the bail and that kind of thing and a spinning rod. And so I looked at him, I said, no, listen, man, this is a great rod. I want you to use this. This is one of the best walleye rods that this particular company made in the past. And, just use it and just let's have a great time. And we get to a spot. We're there. One of his positions was the back corner of the boat, and he was going to cast that way, and he took it like this, and he casted it like a baseball. No, he actually let go of it like a baseball. And it just, plunk. And then I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it just sinks, and then it just slowly disappears. And it's gone. Somebody said, you've been there, you've done that. Keep your hands off my fishing stuff, I'll tell you right now. And of course, he feels terrible because it was mine and he was borrowing it. And of course, it didn't help that I went on about, man, I want you to use this rod and reel. This is a great rod and reel. This is my best walleye rig, It's just, I just like, yeah, it wasn't worth like everybody running over there quick and casting their line to try to hook it or, I certainly wasn't going to jump in and go look for this thing. This was not shallow water. It just quickly I was a little dumbfounded. Of course, he's like, that's the dad, don't worry about it. I got more rods and reels. Here, I'll give you one of my kids' rods. Push button, Zebco, I don't care. Just, here, let me tie a rope to it and put it on your, laughed it off. What are you going to do? It's no big deal. It's a thing. But, we weren't near shore where I could grab a wooden branch and throw it into the water and make it rise. So you think, something's got to be going on. What's the purpose? Why would this guy yell out like this? Now, remember, they're remote, getting materials, bad economic time. It's where simple things became very expensive and hard to find and replace. Most of us, we don't necessarily know what that's quite like. Although, here's a little glimpse. How many of you, I don't know, a year and a half ago, went out and stocked up on toilet paper? There's going to be a shortage of toilet paper we can't find anywhere. I won't have you raise your hand. People are going, I'll tell you, we stocked up a little bit, found some, got it. Who knows who needs it? We have kids around and grandkids, and, we pastor a church. And last thing I want is, people coming to church going, all right, I'm getting too graphic. Okay, so, but yeah, it's that kind of glimpse. Or even today where you're like, hey, this grocery store, the shelf is empty. They don't have it, but they have it over here. And a friend sends you a thing and you go buy it. And you don't buy what you normally buy. You buy a little extra. right? Want to have it. This is something we need. The price has gone up. It's hard to find. Well, that's what we're experiencing is just an indication. It was intensified many times over in what was going on in there in Israel at this time under this king, all of this. And so it wasn't like, hey, bummer, axe head fell off, it's in the water, it's sunk, we aren't going to be able to get this, it's borrowed. It's not like we can just go over to the Fleet Farm or Farm and Fleet or Blaine's or Tractor Supply or Tyson's or wherever. It's not like you can just go run over to the Do It Center, grab one, and start using it. I mean, have you ever lost anything or wrecked anything? I mean, you borrowed somebody's axe and use it, and the head falls off, or how many of you ever split an axe handle because you just couldn't hit the axe part on the wood? You ever see all that tape around axe handles? Up at the par or the top, yeah. My dad had to do that a lot when I was a kid. So it's not just easily replaced, and they can't just run to a store. And these simple items had such a premium on them. Things that we used to think common and take for granted have become so important. And so they couldn't afford it. See, listen, this is the prophets. It's not like huge money's rolling in. And they're remote. And it's a tough economic time. And not only that, they're prophets. They are promoting Yahweh, and the rest of God's people, it's not popular, and they're persecuting them. This is not an item that is easily replaced. It says it's borrowed. So do you know how you make restitution in ancient times like this? Do you know how you make restitution for something that was borrowed and you can't repay them or you can't replace it? You sell yourself to that owner as a slave. Now think about this. Why did he panic? Why did he yell, Elisha, it was borrowed? Because his life is about to change. He is going to be a slave. Life as he knows it is over. It was the big mistake. It was the big mishap. It was borrowed. Elisha, what am I going to do? And Elisha, it says that he cuts a stick, finds out where it's at, and the axe head floats, tells the guy to pick it up. He got his life back from the depths. Why did Elisha cut a stick and throw it in the water? I want you to know that the reason he did it impacts us today. To make us mindful of communion and make us mindful of our life and the life that we got back from the depths of sin or slavery to sin. You see, Elisha, he could have just, was it any harder just to tell the axe head to float? I mean, he's God's prophet of miracles and doing extravagant things that go and defy nature because of God's power and God, putting things in Elisha's heart and mind and honoring Elisha's word. And I mean, they just walk like this. He had a double anointing of Elijah to do miracles. He could have just said, axe head float. He could have thrown a rock in. He could have thrown a leaf in. He could have taken off his belt and threw it in to make this axe head float, but he cut a branch. Now, I know this is really hard to figure out, but what is a branch made of? See, so many scholars among us. It's made of wood. What happened here is a type, T-Y-P-E, a type. In other words, in the Old Testament and up till the time of the coming of Jesus, there were things that were a type or a foreshadowing of the coming Messiah or the Christ. Moses was a type. Do you remember when they took the serpent and put it on a pole? It was high and lifted up, and the people who were bitten looked at it and they were healed. That was a type, a foreshadowing of what Christ would do for people. It's a type. What is happening here isn't just a cool story thrown in right there in 6 verses in the middle of 2 Kings. Here's this really cool story. Yeah, it's about the sovereignty of God, and I guess he cares about the little things of life. To this guy who lost it, this was not just some little item in life. He lost his life, liberty, and freedom because he couldn't repay. And Elisha does this miracle. Here's the connection. Here's the type, the foreshadowing of what Christ would do in our life. That's why it's there. From the beginning of these pages, all of it, it's a revelation of Jesus. This is all a revelation of Christ, who he is and what he does and why he did it and how he cares for you. So here it is. What was the cross made of? Is the light going on? Elisha could have threw anything in. He took that branch, wood, and threw it on the water. And that which was lost became found. That which has been sunk to the depths of sin was redeemed. That which was in slavery and your life was lost, you have been given life again. You see, this is what Jesus did. It's who he is. It's the things we see in all the pages, all the stories, all the historical accounts. Yes, God is awesome, and it's a cool story. But now when you think about what was going on for this man and what he got back, now it's a really cool story. And it's a story that I can relate to, not because I lost somebody's hammer or broke it and had to replace it. It's my life. See, the nature of things, the natural law is when we sin, it separates us from God. And we're condemned. God didn't condemn us. We were condemned because of sin. Now we know in the Gospel of John chapter 3, Jesus, for God so loved the world that whoever believes. And he goes on to say, I didn't come to condemn the world, I came to save the world because the world, people, were already condemned. You see, it's the beautiful story that we have been taken from the depths of sin and rescued and given life and liberty and freedom. And we don't have to serve another master. Jesus paid it all. Jesus put it this way. John chapter 11, Lazarus dies, and Jesus takes a few days to get back, and he meets Martha. And this is, verse 25 in John chapter 11. And Jesus says, Martha, I'm the resurrection and the life. And he says this in that passage. I'm pulling this piece out because he said more. He said, if a person believes in me, though they pass away in this life, nevertheless they live. That's who Jesus is. The power of redemption. The power to dig us out of a pit where he found us. Born in sin. I don't care if you're born to a Christian home or you weren't, or whether you had a good bringing up or a bad bringing up, there's a point where we get to where we have to make our own decision to be a disciple and follower of Jesus, because sin separates us. This man cried out, Elisha, it was borrowed. I've lost my life. I'm going to be a slave. Man, no hope, no future. I totally serve another man's purpose, all because I lost something. Sometimes we lose our way. I want you to know that he throws the cross on his back, and then he threw himself on it so that you and I could be resurrected from the dead, so that we could be rescued from the depths of our sin, our arrogance, our pride, the attitude, whatever it is that separates us from God. The person in this life who believes upon Jesus does not perish. He lives.